Homeless girl accuses millionaire of impregnating her mother, then seconds later makes a revelation that shocks everyone. Comment, giving my story a score from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The church hall was overflowing with white and gold flowers, and the scent of roses filled the air as 300 elegantly dressed guests awaited the most anticipated moment of the ceremony. The 30-year-old widowed millionaire, known for his leading man looks and magnetic presence, adjusted his tie for the third time in 5 minutes. His hands trembled slightly, not from the usual pre-wedding jitters, but from a deep anxiety he had carried for years. The constant doubt about whether people loved him for who he really was, or just for the fortune he had amassed through strategic investments on Wall Street. The bride, heiress to one of the region's largest family fortunes, walked slowly down the center aisle, her silk dress shimmering under the light of the stained glass windows. Each step she took echoed in the respectful silence of those present, who watched with admiration this union between two of the city's wealthiest families. The couple's combined net worth represented millions of dollars, with investments extending from gold to the most modern cryptocurrencies. The pastor had begun the ceremony when the heavy wooden doors of the church swung open with a crash that made everyone turn around. A 4-year-old girl, so thin and fragile that she looked only 2, ran down the center aisle. Her clothes were torn and dirty. Her bare feet left small marks on the red carpet that had cost more money than many families saw in an entire year. The little girl held the hand of a visibly pregnant woman who looked worn and haggard. The woman tried to restrain her daughter, whispering words that were lost in the echo of the hall, but the girl had a determination that surprised all those present. In a childish voice, but surprisingly firm for her age, she shouted words that would transform that day forever. "That handsome man got my mommy pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. 300 pairs of eyes turned to the altar, where the groom stood like a statue, his face as pale as the marble of the church columns. The bride dropped her bouquet of white roses, the petals scattering on the floor like crystallized tears. The pregnant woman, visibly trembling, confirmed in a weak voice, "For months, I searched for the man who abandoned me after a night that changed my life forever. I found you through the newspapers that talked about the wedding." The murmurs started low, but grew like a storm brewing on the horizon. The millionaire felt like the world was collapsing around him. He knew his own medical condition very well. Infertility diagnosed years ago after an accident in his youth that had destroyed his dreams of having a natural family. It was impossible that the accusation was true. The bride, with tears streaming down her carefully made-up face, took a few steps back. "How could you do this to me?" she whispered, her voice echoing through the hall. "On our wedding day?" It was then that a figure emerged from the back of the church, walking slowly between the pews. The guests who saw him first began to whisper even louder, some rising from their seats to get a better view. The man approaching was identical to the groom. The same height, the same face, the same eyes. The only difference were the simple clothes he wore and a small scar on his face that most could not see from a distance. "Hello, brother," said the newcomer, his voice carrying years of hurt and resentment. "It's been a long time." The groom felt his blood run cold. His twin brother, who had disappeared from the family 10 years ago after a devastating fight over their father's inheritance, was there on the day that was supposed to be the happiest of his life. The brother who had chosen a different path, rejecting the world of business and wealth, appearing just when everything seemed to be falling apart. "I've been using your identity on several occasions," continued the twin brother, addressing not only the groom, but the entire church. "To get money and win over women, our resemblance has always been convenient." The revelation fell on those present like a bomb. The bride covered her face with her hands, sobbing. The millionaire felt like he was living a nightmare from which he could not wake up. His whole life, built on the control and precision of his investments, was unraveling before hundreds of witnesses. The homeless girl, in the midst of the chaos, watched everything with keen eyes that seemed to understand much more than her age suggested. She held her mother's hand tightly, but her eyes moved between the two identical men, as if she were studying every detail, every subtle difference that might exist between them. The pastor, completely lost in the situation, tried to restore some order. "Perhaps we should," he began, but his voice was lost in the growing tumult of the guests, who were now getting up and talking in groups, some discreetly taking photos with their cell phones. The bride, recovering part of her composure, looked directly at the millionaire. "I can't marry you knowing this, you." "I can't." And without waiting for an answer, she lifted the hem of her dress and ran down the side aisle of the church, leaving behind not only the groom, but also the dreams of union between two fortunes that represented decades of family planning. The twin brother watched the scene with an expression difficult to decipher. There was satisfaction in his eyes, but also something that looked like sadness or regret. The pregnant woman, leaning against a bench, breathed with difficulty, clearly exhausted by the emotional tension of the moment. The girl, however, did not take her eyes off the millionaire. There was something in her gaze that disturbed him deeply, a premature wisdom, as if she could see through all the masks that people wore. And deep in her big eyes, he recognized something familiar, the same deep loneliness that he carried, disguised by all his wealth and success. 3 weeks had passed since the disaster at the church, and the widowed millionaire still felt the bitter taste of humiliation whenever he left the house. The local newspapers had turned the episode into sensational headlines, and his business reputation was plummeting like his stock prices after the scandal. Business partners cancelled meetings, and some of the biggest investors publicly questioned his moral integrity. Sitting in his luxurious office, he watched through the panoramic window the city that had once respected him. His net worth in dollars remained immense, but for the first time in years, money could not solve his problems. The loneliness he had always carried had turned into something much heavier, a complete isolation that not all his fortune could alleviate. The doorbell of the apartment rang, interrupting his dark thoughts. When he opened the door, he found the homeless girl standing in the hallway, still wearing the same torn clothes from the church, but now carrying a small drawing in her hands. Her big eyes studied him with that same disturbing intensity that he remembered from the wedding day. "My mommy is in the hospital," she said simply, holding out the paper. I drew the man she met. The drawing was surprisingly detailed for a 4-year-old. It showed a man in a suit, but there was something specific on his left wrist, a small mark that looked like a scar. The millionaire examined the paper with growing attention, feeling something strange form in his stomach. "Why did you come to me?" he asked, crouching down to be at the girl's height. "Because my mummy said that you look like him, but you have different eyes," she replied, tilting her head. "Sad eyes like mine." The child's observation hit him like a punch. For the first time since the episode at the church, someone had seen beyond his wealth, beyond the scandal, seeing only a lonely man. He looked again at the drawing, paying special attention to the scar represented on the wrist. "Where is your mommy now?" he asked, a genuine concern growing in his chest. "At the public hospital. She's very sick because of the baby," the girl replied, her small voice carrying a weight that no child should know. "The nurses said it's dangerous." The millionaire felt a pang of something he had not experienced in years, the urgent need to help someone without expecting anything in return. He grabbed his car keys, deciding to accompany the girl to the hospital, not knowing that this simple gesture would change the course of their lives forever. The public hospital was a shocking contrast to the world of luxury in which he lived. Overcrowded corridors, strong smell of disinfectant, and people waiting in endless lines for basic care. The girl guided him through the mazes of corridors with a familiarity that broke his heart. She knew that place because she spent hours there every day. The girl's mother was in a room shared with 3 other women. When she saw him enter, her eyes filled with tears. She was a woman of about 25 years, but suffering made her look older. Even debilitated by the complicated pregnancy, there was a dignity in her bearing that impressed him. "You came," she whispered, trying to sit up in bed. "I didn't expect." "Your daughter brought me," he replied, feeling uncomfortable with the evident gratitude in her eyes. "How are you feeling?" "The doctors say it's a high-risk pregnancy, problems with the placenta," she explained, stroking her belly. I don't have money for private treatment. I'm on the waiting list for a surgery that can save the baby." The millionaire observed the precarious environment around. Old equipment, lack of basic resources, overcrowding. For the first time, he saw clearly how his wealth could make a real difference in someone's life, but something prevented him from acting impulsively. The need to understand the whole truth first. "Tell me about the man you met," he asked, pulling a plastic chair closer to the bed. The woman looked at her daughter, who had settled in a corner and was drawing again on a piece of paper she had found. "I worked as a nurse in a private clinic downtown. I had lost my previous job and was desperate. He showed up there for medical exams." "What kind of exams?" "Fertility tests. He said he had been trying to have children for years without success," she continued, her voice getting weaker. "We talked during several visits. He seemed genuinely interested in my story, in my dreams. He talked about how he felt alone, despite all the money he had." The millionaire felt a shiver run down his spine. That description could apply to him perfectly, but he knew that he had never had fertility tests at a private clinic. His condition had been diagnosed in a public hospital after the accident. "Do you have the records of these exams?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "I have copies at home." "I always keep important documents," she replied. "Why?" Before he could answer, the girl approached with another drawing. This one showed 2 men side by side, apparently identical, but with small details that are different. On one of them, she had specifically highlighted the scar on the left wrist. "They are the 2 handsome men," she explained, showing the paper. "But this one," she pointed to the figure with the scar, "has marks that the other doesn't have." The revelation hit the millionaire like lightning. His memory went back to his childhood, when he and his twin brother were practically indistinguishable, except for a small scar that his brother had earned at the age of 8 by falling out of a tree. A mark that was always hidden under watches and bracelets. "I need to see those documents," he said, getting up abruptly. "Today." The woman tried to protest that she was not in a condition to leave the hospital, but he had already made a decision. He called his private doctor, and in less than an hour had arranged her transfer to the best private hospital in the city. Not as a gesture of guilt or obligation, but because he had finally found something that justified using his fortune in a meaningful way. During the journey in the private ambulance, the girl held his hand. "You are different from him," she said simply. "Your eyes don't lie." Those words echoed in the millionaire's mind as they drove to the private hospital. For the first time in 10 years, he felt that he was on the right path to discover the truth, not only about the baby's paternity, but about who he really was, beyond all his wealth. At the private hospital, while the girl's mother was examined by the best specialists that money could buy, he held the medical documents in his trembling hands. The tests clearly showed that the man who had impregnated that woman was fertile, completely opposite to his own medical condition. But there was something else in the documents that chilled him to the bone. A handwritten note from the nurse, small and almost imperceptible, describing a characteristic scar on the patient's left wrist. The evidence he needed was there, in black and white. His twin brother had not only used his identity, he had manipulated a vulnerable woman, impregnating her and then disappearing, leaving her alone to face the consequences. The anger he felt was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was not just for the public humiliation, but for the deliberate cruelty with which his brother had destroyed the life of an innocent family. The girl, sitting next to him in the luxurious waiting room, continued drawing. This time, she had created an image of three people holding hands, her mother, and a male figure. In the corner of the paper, she had written in crooked letters, "New Family." Looking at that simple drawing, the millionaire understood something that would change his life forever. Perhaps true wealth was not in his financial investments or assets, but in the possibility of building something genuine with people who valued him for who he was, not for what he possessed. 2 months had passed since the transfer of the girl's mother to the private hospital, and the millionaire discovered that his life had changed in ways he had never imagined. Every day after work, he visited the hospital, bringing books for the girl, and talking at length with her mother about issues that went far beyond her medical condition. The woman, whose name he discovered was Maria Eleanor, was trained as a nurse and possessed a sharp intelligence that impressed him. During their conversations, she revealed details about her life that made him understand the extent of his twin brother's manipulation. Maria Elena had lost her parents in an accident when she was young, had raised her daughter alone working double shifts, and was in a particularly vulnerable phase when she met the man who was impersonating him. He talked about investments, about how he had made money with Bitcoin and stock market applications, Maria Elena said on a rainy afternoon while watching through the hospital room window. He said he felt empty despite all the wealth, that he was looking for someone who really loved him. The millionaire felt a pang of bitter irony. Those were exactly the words he could have said, the feelings he really carried. His brother had used his own emotional pain as a tool of seduction, turning genuine vulnerability into cruel manipulation. The girl, who he learned was named Sophia, had become a constant presence in his life. She had an impressive photographic memory and continued to create increasingly detailed drawings. One afternoon, she showed him an entire notebook filled with portraits of people she had met throughout her life, each face captured with a precision that defied her age. "How can you remember so much?" he asked, leafing through the notebook with admiration. "My mommy says I have a special head," Sophia replied, smiling shyly. "I remember everything I see, even the bad things." It was then that she showed him a drawing that left him speechless. It was his twin brother, but not a general representation. Every detail was perfect, from the scar on his wrist to a small birthmark on his neck that only close family members knew. Even more disturbing was the expression she had captured, a coldness in her eyes that he had never noticed when they were children. "Where did you see him to draw like this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "He visited Mommy a few times at the public hospital before you showed up," Sophia replied casually. "He would spy in the corridors, but when the nurses asked who he was, he would say he was visiting someone else." The revelation was like a punch in the stomach. His brother had been monitoring Maria Elena and Sophia all along, watching the unfolding of the situation he himself had created. The cruelty of the situation was overwhelming. He had not only abandoned a pregnant woman, but continued to torment her with his ghostly presence. That night, the millionaire made a decision that would change everything. He called a private investigator, a discreet man he had used a few times to check on suspicious business partners. He needed to find his brother and confront him directly. But more importantly, he needed to find out how many other women had been victims of the same manipulation. The investigation revealed facts that made him nauseous. His twin brother had used his identity at least 5 times in the last 3 years, always following the same pattern. He looked for vulnerable women in situations of financial difficulty, presented himself as the successful millionaire, promised help and a serious relationship, and then disappeared, leaving only emotional destruction behind. But there was something more disturbing in the investigators' reports. His brother was deeply in debt, owed money to dangerous loan sharks, and had developed a gambling addiction that consumed any amount he could get his hands on. The man who had once rejected the family's luxurious life was now desperate for money, using the millionaire brother's identity as his only source of income. During this period of painful discoveries, Maria Elena's health stabilized, but doctors warned that she would need complete rest for the next few months to ensure a safe pregnancy. The millionaire, without hesitation, offered his country house as a recovery location, a quiet property on the outskirts of the city that he rarely used. The move to the country house brought a closeness that he had never experienced. Sophia explored every corner of the property with the natural curiosity of a child, while Maria Elena, gradually recovering her strength, began to take care of the house with a dedication that touched him deeply. For the first time in years, he was coming home eager to find people who genuinely cared about his well-being. It was during a simple dinner on the porch of the country house that Maria Elena asked a question that caught him completely off guard. "Why are you doing all this for us? You know you're not obligated to." The question echoed in the silence of the night, accompanied only by the sound of crickets and the wind in the trees. The millionaire looked at Sophia, who had fallen asleep on the porch sofa holding one of her drawings, and then at Maria Elena, whose eyes reflected gratitude mixed with genuine concern for him. "Because you see me," he finally replied. "Not my money, not my social standing, not what I can offer. You see who I really am, and that's something I can't buy with all my fortune." Maria Elena smiled, a warm expression that lit up her tired face. "You are a good man." Very different from what I imagined when Sophia told me about the rich man from the church. That night, while watching the stars from the porch, the millionaire understood that he was experiencing something he had sought throughout his adult life, a genuine family. Not based on financial interest or social convenience, but on mutual care and true affection. But his peace was interrupted 3 days later when he found Sophia crying in the garden, holding a crumpled drawing. When he managed to calm her down enough for her to speak, the girl's words chilled him to the bone. "The bad man was here yesterday," she sobbed. "He was hiding behind the trees, looking at our house. I drew him, but I was scared." The drawing clearly showed his twin brother, but this time Sophia had captured something new in his expression, a dangerous anger, a determination that suggested he no longer intended to stay hidden. Apparently, he had found out where they were living and was not satisfied with the way the situation had turned out. The millionaire felt a fear he had not experienced since childhood, not for himself, but for Sophia and Maria Elena. His brother had gone from an opportunistic manipulator to something potentially more dangerous, a desperate man who saw his source of income and false identity being threatened. That same night, he hired discreet security for the property and began making plans for a final confrontation that he knew was inevitable. But what he didn't know was that his twin brother had already taken the next step in a game far more complex than he imagined. The next morning, when reporters arrived at the gate of the country house, he discovered that his ex-fiancée had given a devastating interview to the local press, revealing intimate details about his betrayal and suggesting that he had lied about his medical condition to cover up affairs. The article included photos of him with Maria Elena and Sophia, taken with a telephoto lens, and insinuated that he had always known about the pregnancy and had chosen to hide the truth until after the wedding. Watching Maria Elena read the article with growing horror, and Sophia hiding behind the curtains, afraid of the photographers, the millionaire understood that his brother's psychological warfare had only just begun. And this time, the people he loved most were directly in the line of fire. The media pressure had become unbearable. For an entire week, reporters camped at the entrance to the property, helicopters flew over the country house, and every move the millionaire made was documented and distorted to fuel the scandal. His company had lost 3 major contracts, his shares plummeted on Wall Street, and some investors began to publicly question his leadership ability. Maria Elena, visibly shaken by the public exposure, began to have premature contractions that worried the doctors. Sophia stopped drawing and refused to leave the house, afraid of the photographers who shouted questions about the rich daddy whenever they spotted her. The millionaire felt he was losing everything that really mattered, while struggling to protect the 2 people who had brought true meaning to his life. It was during one of those distressing nights that his twin brother finally appeared, not hidden among the trees this time, but walking casually through the front door, as if he owned the place. The millionaire found him in the living room, drinking a glass of the most expensive whiskey from his collection, smiling with an arrogance that made his blood boil. "You've always had it easy, haven't you?" said the twin brother, swirling the golden liquid in the glass. "Nice house, endless money, respect from society, never had to fight for anything. And you thought you had the right to destroy the lives of innocent people because of that," replied the millionaire, keeping his distance but watching every move his brother made. "Innocent people." The twin brother laughed bitterly. That woman knew exactly what she was doing. She was looking for a rich man to solve her financial problems. I just offered what she wanted. Lying about who you were, using my identity, abandoning her pregnant. "Technical details," the brother replied indifferently. "But now you have an opportunity to fix the situation. I need money, a lot of money. Let's say $2 million. In exchange, I disappear from your lives forever and publicly admit that I was the one who impregnated your substitute wife." The blackmail was clear and despicable. The millionaire felt a purer anger than anything he had ever experienced, but before he could respond, Sophia appeared on the staircase. The girl had woken up to the voices and was now watching the 2 identical men with her keen eyes. "You're the bad man," she said simply, pointing to the twin brother. "Your eyes are different. They're like the wolves in the storybooks." The twin brother turned to her with an expression that made the millionaire take a protective step forward. "Too smart for her own good, that child," he muttered. It was at that moment that Sophia did something that would change everything. She ran down the stairs and went directly to the study, returning with her drawing notebook. With the determination that only a 4-year-old can have, she opened the notebook to a specific page and showed it to both men. "I made this drawing at the hospital when you visited Mommy," she said, showing a detailed portrait. "But it's not the same as the others." The drawing showed the twin brother, but Sophia had captured something that no adult had noticed, a small tattoo behind his left ear, almost imperceptible, but clearly visible to someone with her exceptional photographic memory. It was a symbol he did not recognize, but that obviously had meaning for his brother, because he paled upon seeing the drawing. "How did you?" began the twin brother, but was interrupted by a sound that made everyone freeze. Maria Elena was screaming upstairs, not screams of fear, but of intense physical pain. Her water had broken, and the contractions were coming in waves that indicated that the baby was being born prematurely, possibly in response to the extreme stress of the last few days. The millionaire ran upstairs, followed by Sophia, leaving the twin brother alone in the living room. He found Maria Elena on the floor of the room, pale and breathing with difficulty. "The baby is coming," she whispered. "It's too early." While desperately calling for the ambulance, he heard the sound of his twin brother's car speeding away. But at that moment, that didn't matter. All that mattered was that Maria Elena and the baby survived. The ride to the hospital was the longest of his life. Sophia held Maria Elena's hand, humming a song that she said was to calm the baby. The millionaire watched Maria Elena's face, silently promising that he would do anything to make her and the child okay. At the hospital, during the endless hours of emergency surgery, He found himself making promises he had never imagined making. If Maria Elena and the baby survived, he would dedicate his life to being the father and husband they deserved, not out of obligation or guilt, but because he had found in them the family he had always sought. Sophia fell asleep in his arms in the waiting room, still holding the drawing notebook. Leafing through the pages while waiting for news, he discovered something that moved him. In the latest drawings, Sophia had started to include a new recurring figure, a man who clearly was him, but always drawn smiling, always next to her and Maria Elena, always with an expression of genuine happiness. When the doctor finally appeared with news, his tired but smiling face said it all. Mother and baby are fine. It was difficult, but we made it. It's a boy, healthy despite being born a few weeks ahead of schedule. The relief he felt was so intense that his legs almost gave way. Sophia woke up to his sobs of gratitude and, without fully understanding what was happening, began to draw furiously on a new page, a family of 4 people, all holding hands, all smiling. 3 days later, while Maria Elena recovered and he held the little baby in his arms, he received an unexpected call. It was his ex-fiancée, but this time her voice was different, vulnerable, regretful. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about my deal with your brother." The revelation that followed completed the final puzzle. His ex-fiancée had discovered the existence of the twin brother months before the wedding, through a private investigator she had hired to check his fidelity. But instead of confronting him directly, she had made a secret deal with the brother. She would finance his gambling debts in exchange for him publicly ruining the millionaire's reputation, forcing him to transfer part of his fortune to her as compensation for the scandal. "But I didn't know about the pregnant woman," she continued, crying. "I didn't know he had hurt innocent people. When I saw the photos of you at the country house, I saw how you looked at her and the girl. I realized you had found something real, something I could never give you." The confession brought a painful but liberating understanding. The whole scandal, all the public humiliation, had been an elaborate conspiracy between 2 people he had trusted. But paradoxically, this betrayal had led to the meeting with Maria Elena and Sophia, leading him to the true happiness he never knew was possible. 2 months later, in a small and intimate ceremony in the same chapel where he had been publicly humiliated, the millionaire married Maria Elena. Sophia was the flower girl, carrying a bouquet that she herself had chosen and a new drawing that would show the whole family, now including the baby, living happily ever after. His twin brother never appeared again. The private investigator discovered that he had fled the country, using false documents and leaving behind only debts and victims. But the millionaire no longer felt anger or the need for revenge. He had found something much more valuable than any satisfaction that justice could bring. That night, after the ceremony, while watching Sophia draw in the garden of his house and Maria Elena breastfeed his adoptive son, he understood the final irony of his story. He had spent years accumulating wealth, investing in stocks, securities, and even Bitcoin, building an impressive fortune in dollars and euros. But the real fortune, the unconditional love of a family that valued him for who he was, had arrived just when he was willing to lose everything. Sophia approached with her latest drawing, a representation of the new family under a rainbow. In the corner of the paper, she had written in letters still shaky but determined, "My real family." Holding that drawing, the millionaire finally understood that sometimes the greatest riches come from the most unexpected places, and that true redemption is born from suffering transformed into compassion. His journey had begun with public humiliation and ended with the discovery that genuine love is worth more than any fortune that money can buy. If you liked this wonderful story, please comment. Giving it a score from 0 to 10, your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.